Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our live broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook Live and Twitter. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, the first arrival of enslaved Africans to America and Harriet Tubman, perhaps slavery's fiercest opponent. August 1619, the date 20 Africans landed on the shores of America near present-day Hampton, Virginia. August 2019, thousands of African Americans, descendants of those first Africans, gathered to commemorate the 400th anniversary of their arrival. At the same time, the New York Times Magazine published the 1619 Project, a special report conceived by African American journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones. Are both public acknowledgments evidence that some in the country are finally ready to discuss slavery's legacy? Also, Harriet Tubman, the most well-known conductor on the Underground Railroad, led hundreds of enslaved people to freedom. But that's just part of her amazing story, now portrayed in a newly released film, Harriet. Joining me tonight, Marita Rivero, President and CEO of the Museum of African American History. She is also a former VP and General Manager of Radio and Television here at WGBH. Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson, Assistant Professor of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. She is the author of Force and Freedom, Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence. Renee Graham, Associate Editor and Opinion Columnist for the Boston Globe, and Kim McLaren, Associate Professor of Writing, Literature, and Publishing, Emerson College. She's also a columnist for the Washington Post, The Lily. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So even though the official commemoration was in August of this year, we're celebrating all year. Well, celebrating is the wrong word, but we're acknowledging all year the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first Africans. How important is it in terms of making a dent in what not just African Americans, but all Americans know about the legacy of slavery, Kelly?
Oh gosh, it's huge. It's huge. I think that, you know, we historians rarely get these moments where we get to sort of have a national conversation that lasts longer than a month or two to really talk about the origins of this country, the history of this country, and get people plugged in ways that they would not have been plugged in normally. I think there's something we talk about all the time in the classroom, but when the New York Times issued this project, it really became a national conversation that moved outside of the classroom into public conversations, into podcasts where people could really engage with this history in a significant way. And I don't know, I've just been really impressed by it and the amount of conversation that it sparked.
Mm-hmm. We should note that when I say thousands of people went to the official commemoration, they came from around the world because slavery and its impact on, in America really has touched so many in the diaspora. So lots of people came back to pay attention to all of that. Marita, what's your take on how important it is to have the significance of the commemoration of this anniversary and to be discussing this history?
We just talk about expanding the American story. You know, it really, we're standing right next to one another, and there's no reason to just tell one narrow story. When you start from that base, you really don't understand what we're doing today. You have no connection to the issues of today. So the idea that back to back, the Times and Hampton could put together enough kind of information and have that power to begin to have people say, oh, all right, what was that again? Means that as we think about our issues of equity and race and who is here and who's an American, seems to be a big deal now. Who's an American?
Right.
We can have a much more informed view. There were women here. There were all kinds of people of color, Caribbean people, South Americans, people of different religions. We were all right here. So let's tell that story.
Renee, what's your take?
No, I think I agree with what's been said. It's an important conversation to have because it broadens the narrative of this country. Right. It's also important because this is really living history. This isn't some dusty thing that happened 400 years ago and we're looking back and saying, oh, look how terrible that was. What happened in 1619 informs where we are today. And I think that's part of what's driving the interest in it. We're looking at what's happening in the country right now politically, and there's a sense that, oh my God, this thing just suddenly happened. And what the 1619 Project tells us is that, no, this didn't just happen. Where we are now is 400 years in the making. You know, and I think that is a kind of history that not just African Americans, but all Americans have to grapple with and deal with and understand what happened then to realize where we are today.
So Kim, what happened in the 1619 Project as envisioned by Nicole Hannah-Jones was a reframing of how we have traditionally thought about the first Africans that came, and also what is foundational history for America.
Yeah, I think the success of the project is that reframing, not just of the African American story, but of the American story, right? We like to tell this story of America beginning at Jamestown, Plymouth Rock, and then 1776. We hit these highlights, and Black people are absent from those highlights, and then of course slavery, and then we deal with that in like a week or two in junior high school, right? And then we move on to the real story of America,
The Great Depression,
the Great Depression,
World War
right?
II.
So what the project is doing, or attempting to do, and I think has done, beginning to do, is to reframe that story, not just again of Black people, but of the United States. The United States begins, setting aside the issue that Africans were here actually before 1619, which is really important, right? Those weren't literally the first Africans to step foot on the shores of even North America, let alone the Americas. But I think it's in framing the story of this is where America begins. It begins with the enslavement of African people. It's important, as Renee said, to reframe this story of liberty and justice for all. In fact, that wasn't it from the beginning. And America has to face that story if we are ever to move forward. I don't know if we will. I think this conversation is helpful and really important, but it has to happen.
Well, part of the 1619 Project as envisioned by Nicole Hannah-Jones, there is a component of education about it in schools. Now, I'm mentioning that because a lot of people have sounded the alarm. Marita, you and I were just at a conference where they are describing enslavement and people who are enslaved as indentured servants and migrants. This is real. This is not in textbooks. Not in some articles. So you all reacted, but talk about why that's a huge problem.
Oh, this is I can't even begin to tell you how problematic this is when I'm trying to teach a course on history, and I'm trying to tell students that textbooks are not benign. They're not these books where if you have 2 chapters dedicated to the history of Christianity and like 2 paragraphs on Islam. These are both old religions. Like, that's really political. We see how that is not subjective, or is subjective, I should say. And it's the same thing when we look at the history of African Americans. When you want to dilute slavery down to something that's palatable, that can be digestible in a certain amount of time, and not be seen as too violent, and not put the onus on whiteness or white supremacy, it creates this narrative that 1, slavery was not that bad, 2, that the enslaved could have done something about it, but they were really happy the way that they were, and 3, that also white people and white supremacy is not problematic, right, in the way that they're operating within the confines of slavery. So
and that slavery is incidental to America as opposed to foundational. I mean, that's really important. And that's really the impulse, is to create this idea that yes, it was this bad thing that happened and we shouldn't have done it, but it didn't really have much to do with this great nation that we founded. And that is simply not correct. No. It's not true financially, economically, historically, in terms politically. It is foundational to everything, and that's what a lot of people don't want to accept.
Like, that's the disservice that's done to generations of American school children.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about slavery, you get this little dollop of slavery, and then the Civil War, and then Reconstruction, everything was great. And then we get to the Great Depression.
And then Rosa Parks sat down.
And then Rosa Parks sat down. And then Martin Luther King, and it was all good.
Yeah.
But what it ignores is that you're talking about almost 250 years of slavery in this nation. Compare that to, say, the end of the Civil War to where we are today. That's a little more than 150 years. So in the existence of this nation, it was more of a slave nation, a nation of enslaved people, than it was of free people. Right. So how do you boil that down to a week? Right. Yeah. Or do
a
Civil
semester,
War,
even
right?
Right.
It's this idea that that history belongs to the victors. Well, that has to change. Because the victors they skewed it. They stacked the deck so that somehow what white people did and how the very way that their attitudes harmed this nation and continue to do so literally gets whitewashed. Yeah. And then it's not so bad. So if you're talking about slaves as, or enslaved people as indentured servants, or as I think someone in the Trump administration said, immigrants, you know, it always is designed to lessen the horrors that were heaped upon these people for centuries.
And you look at the, I want to say the gross national product of the United States, this accounted for about 70% of our gross national product. Everybody was involved in this.
Exactly.
So by the time we get to, let's say, 1900, we're one of the richest nations in the world.
Right.
Where
Off
does
the
that
backs
wealth
of
come
enslavement.
from?
Right.
But by then, the money has been washed through banks,
Yeah.
through the financial institutions. We're now talking about robber barons and the Belle Epoque and, you know, transcontinental railroads. And, you know, we've moved into a whole nother discussion about builders. Without taking into consideration at all where that cash came from, where it came from. And I'd say along the way, what it did to the people who were really pushing other people down, to ignore that, to ignore what was going on while you're making money.
And the other thing
justify it is a problem.
To pick up on what you're saying is one of the things that all these discussions from the commemoration and in the 1619 Project do so well is connect what happened 400 years ago up to today.
Yes.
So by telling a story about traffic and how it is connected to
everything, policing, right? Even the nature of capitalism. I thought the piece on the nature of capitalism and why it's a particularly violent capitalism is related to
or
that.
healthcare. My goodness, I mean, just Black people's relationship with their own health, and how racism has an impact on their physical bodies. When they go to see the doctor, how they're treated at the doctor. If you think of the housing crisis, I mean, every single thing that you can think of, mass incarceration, all of that plays into the origins of slavery and how that operated.
Right. So one of the things that continues to be misconstrued, and we have to set the record straight constantly, and it's important, is that from the moment those 20 stepped on the shore, they were fighting back. They fought back in the Middle Passage to bring them here. They fought back when they got here. They fought back, they fought back, they fought back. So it was not a ready acceptance of, oh, well, I'm captured and this is my fate. That needs to be said. And I'm saying that as a way of leading into one of the fiercest opponents of slavery, and that's Harriet Tubman. People may know her as I said, as the best known conductor on the Underground Railroad. So first, I want to talk about the film that's just come out about Harriet. It's called Harriet. Let's look at a scene from the film Harriet, and this is with abolitionist William Still, portrayed by Leslie Odom Jr., expressing his concern to Harriet about if she gets caught rescuing enslaved people.
Rescuing slaves requires skill and careful planning. It requires reading, Harriet. Can you read a sign or a map? Can you read it all?
I put my attention on trying to hear God's voice more clearly.
Do you know what would happen if you got caught? They would torture you until you pointed them right to this office. You got lucky, Harriet. And there's nothing more you can do.
Don't you tell me what I can't do. I made it this far on my own. God was watching, but my feet was my own. Running, bleeding, climbing, nearly drowned, nothing to eat for days and days, man. I made it. So don't you tell me what I can't do.
That's a scene from the new film Harriet, opens today. It's about Harriet Tubman. And in this film, we see a new Harriet. In the past, I think most people think of Harriet as an old woman who, yes, indeed, brought many enslaved people to freedom. But you never imagine her as being a young woman or who she was when she freed herself and what that would be like on the other side as she's talking to the abolitionists. And by the way, William Still is a real person. Response to Harriet, the film.
Well, I really wanted to like it. I would just say, I think it does her, I like seeing the young Harriet. I like that she is shown as strong. I think you can tell us how historically accurate it is. My sense is that it's pretty historically accurate. I had some concerns with some of the side characters, so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but namely having the black man be the slave catcher and be the most brutal character on film, and then the issue at the end. So I thought it was a worthy effort as a film and a necessary one, but I I personally was actually a little disappointed. Sorry.
I loved it.
I loved it
Can
too.
I say that? I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it for so many reasons. But we don't have all day. But I loved it because, one, I teach a course on slavery and film, and if you know the genre, there's basically nothing that has a black woman protagonist at the center of the film. Harriet sort of dominates every single frame of this film. She's in it, and she's fierce throughout the entire film, and I fed off of that energy. It was so powerful for me to see a black woman saying, here's what you won't do, and here's what you won't tell me what to do. And it was just so good to see her armed from the moment she leaves the plantation to the rescues that she
And your
has.
research is into that.
It's all about, well, force and freedom.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all about how she had to engage in force and had to engage in violence.
That doesn't explain the end, though. But I don't want to
Well,
ruin
see, I
it.
feel like
It's
well, see,
problematic.
yes,
It's
I
problematic.
I know. I don't want to get into spoilers, but I felt like historically there are a lot of aspects of it that were accurate. There are also a lot of artistic license that's taking place. I do want to let it be clear that there were black slave catchers,
Yes,
and that's a really big deal, that black slave catchers were even more sort of successful because they could win the trust of their black companions or black community and then sell them off, you know, for X amount of dollars. There's also, and in my own book, I talk about how those same black slave catchers are also the most susceptible to violence. So the community takes it out on them extremely harsh when they see what it is that they're doing. Some of them are beaten to death. Some of them are actually killed. And so I didn't, when I saw the black slave catcher in the film, that didn't surprise me. And I do think, though, that the film assumes that the audience knows that the real villain is slavery. So when I watched the film, I thought the villain is slavery. But I think if you're not assuming that premise, you see the black man.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important that the film exists.
Yes.
You know, I mean, Harriet Tubman has been dead, you know, well more than a century, and this is the first film about her life, or at least a part of her life. And you compare that to how many films there have been about Lincoln. You know, between in 2005 and 2006, there were 2 films on Truman Capote writing in cold blood. So, you know, the fact that this film exists is kind of a miracle in and of itself. Having said that, you know, I kind of agree with Kim. There were things about it that were disappointing. And one of the things that bothered me most, well, a couple of things, but one was these weird injections of humor. And maybe it was a screening I attended, but there were a few times they tried to almost like lighten the mood, and I thought, I don't think so. There were films like the moment with her father, and he wouldn't want to see her, and the audience was laughing through some of those films.
I think that's the audience.
Now maybe
It
it could have been the audience,
Yeah.
but and also with
When
the
he was
younger,
blindfolded, you mean?
right,
Or-
right. People kept laughing every time he would show up, or also even a few scenes with the younger slave catcher. You know, and I kind of thought,
And when,
is this,
when he falls off the chair,
right,
I
is
mean,
there something
it's supposed to be
off
comical.
about, right, and I thought, I can get through this movie without comedy. I'm good.
I
you know?
think that's. I think
And it might have been
that's-
the audience,
Yeah.
and it just,
think
but
it was
it
the
just,
audience, too.
but I can't imagine this movie wasn't tested, and it's like, if people are laughing, then you need to tweak that scene.
Yeah.
You know, you need to do something about that. But I think that Cynthia Erivo, who plays Harriet Tubman, is fantastic.
Yes.
You know, she is absolutely mesmerizing. And in so many ways, this is a superhero movie.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Which is
That's
what
the
director,
design, right?
Yeah,
That's, right.
Cassie Lemon said.
That's the model
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And Cynthia herself said, yes, Marita.
I mean, I loved it. I liked it. I knew the story, and I thought I was prepared to be bored because most biopics are just and then this happened and then that happened. You know, it remained an adventure for me. I knew, you know, I could see her words being written into the script, but they came not as big quotes. They just sounded like something she was saying.
Yeah.
I liked the acting in it. And I, too, took it on as superhero. I took it on as, please don't bore me with some kind of step-by-step thing. And I loved it that we saw a young woman with the young Harriet, not the old woman with the white lace.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But we saw a young woman who was vibrant, who was illiterate, who could not read or write. And you cannot say that she wasn't intelligent, creative, driven, all the
Courageous.
values,
Dynamic.
courageous,
Dynamic, yeah.
all those values
Yeah.
that somehow were there, that are washed out of black life often. Black women, particularly if you were an enslaved person and can't read or write.
Yeah.
And she
But also,
refuted
she
all of that.
desired, you know? Her
Yes,
husband
yes.
loves
Yes,
her.
which was wonderful.
There's scenes
And-
where they're
and-
kissing, and it's like,
Yeah,
to
she got a
think of
family.
Harriet Tubman as someone who is attractive and desired and loved by a man.
Who has,
Right.
and also who has a family,
Yes.
who has
Right.
parents, who has
And
siblings.
who wants a family.
But I think,
Yes.
well, I was just going to say, I think she's definitely a superhero. And I agree with Renee that I'm glad this film exists. I think it'll be important. I think it'll be a useful educational tool. I think it succeeds more as that than as a film. And perhaps I'm critiquing it on the wrong level. So I hope we will have many more Harriet films, because the superhero thing was a choice and an important one, and I like that. But again, part of me is she was also a human being, right? And she was not, in fact, she was a bad blank. I can't say that on PBS, right? But she was also a human being, and I personally, and again, it's hard to ask for everything from one film, so perhaps that's four. But and there's a risk in portraying her as a superhero, and and the risk is that we don't see her full humanity, which I think she tried to do a good job of balancing that. I personally think the balance fell slightly on the wrong side.
Well, I really loved it, because I held my breath because I did know a lot about her, and I wanted to see her all the way. I don't know why you didn't like the end. I mean, more could have been done with the end. Let me say that.
No, I don't mean that end,
Yeah.
but the choice, I don't want to give it away.
I know what
right?
you're talking
You know what I'm talking about, right?
I wanted to make sure that we got her activity as a general, as leading that
Yes.
raid
Oh, yeah.
at the Combahee River that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
And she was called a general. She got full military honors when she died.
Yeah.
She's the first woman to lead this.
right. Yeah.
She was a spy, went behind that, and ended up freeing 750 enslaved people. This woman was incredible. And at the end of her life, setting up an old age home, and then an infirmary, and all of these things, and resettling her folks, and going back 13 times. So so she absolutely ought to be on the $20 bill.
One spoiler alert, though.
Yeah.
The South loses the war.
Exactly.
I'm not spoiling that for anybody, but the lost cause stays lost.
I think it's important to note that there were a lot of black women in the making of the film. There was Casey Lemons, who was the director. There was Deborah Martin Chase, who's one of the producers, who had been wanting to produce this film, and they really worked it. Gregory Allen Howard is a black man who wrote the first draft of it, but then when more information came up, scholarly Casey added something to it. So they really worked hard, not to mention that Cynthia's in it and all the rest of the people who were doing it, to try to get it as. And listen, you guys, I know people said to me, it's simplistic. It is, but people do not know any of this history. I don't have a problem with this.
Yeah.
I do not.
I don't have a problem, especially
I want
when-
somebody to know the history.
Well, that's why I said it
Yeah.
succeeds more as it's a great
It's a
film to
place
show
to
in junior
start.
high school, and I think it should be shown there, but it doesn't.
But the
succeed
old
as a
folk
great
don't
film.
know it, honey.
And you hope
That's what
people
we were
fill in
talking
the
about.
gaps.
Well, that's why you
Yeah.
start
You
there
always,
and
you
move it
hope
up.
people don't take the film and decide this is all I need to know, that they then decide to read the books and fill in the gaps.
Yes.
that
But
are
they
there.
won't. You know they won't. This is America.
A girl
right?
can hope.
Right.
And sometimes it inspires people to pick up
I
and go
think
for
they
it.
will.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things that are problematic about the film Glory, but I can say that it prompted a lot of people to find out more about the 54th and more about black men who fought in the Civil War. And what my hope for this film is that it's a beginning, and that people will see it as a start, that if you can make 5 films on Lincoln, you can surely make 5 films on Harriet. You can do different aspects of her life. For sure. I didn't need it to be like, transformative, Oscar worthy. I needed it to exist and be good or good enough, and I could work with everything else around it. I completely admit that there are places where cinematically it fails. It's it's somewhat predictable given what people may or may not know about her life.
But I think if you don't know anything, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I had some conversations with young people who did not, and by the way, I didn't know about the 54th until Glory.
Oh, yeah.
So see, so here I am.
Harriet met the 54th when they arrived in South Carolina.
That's right. That's right. So here we are. So I mean, I
But
could
are
have
we
been one of those
relying
people.
on films to teach history?
No,
Is
but
that
we're
what
relying.
doing?
But films can. I think what we're saying is films can lead you. Because I was like, what? This right here? What?
People will learn more about her life in the film than they're going to learn in school.
That's
and
right.
that
That's the
indicts
truth.
the school system.
Exactly. That's an
That's the
indictment
fact.
of our
It is.
school system.
People
Yeah.
learn
And
more
how
about
many times are
anything
you watching
it.
something on TV just randomly and you're like, what? And you go look it up. You
right.
go
Yes.
add, you
That's
get
right.
other information. So I think that this is a a jumping off point. And because all of them involved in this project are so determined that this story get out more fully than it has been, I do believe it's going to lead people to do it. And in the context of 1619 anniversary, you know, it's not that they timed it for that, but you know, it just happened that way.
There's a moment
It's-
right
it's-
now.
it's-
And I also
yeah.
think it's layered in that you have the film. There's tons of books and more books that are on the way. Definitely, there's
Yeah.
children's literature. There are podcasts now. There's a whole
Yeah,
podcast
we're
called
gonna get
Following
to it, yeah.
Harriet. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can access her as a person.
And we're going to talk about some more of it. But right now, this is the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Stay with us right now as we continue our conversation on Facebook Live and Twitter.